The October 24th meeting of the City of Lawrence Redevelopment Commission is called to order. A quorum is present. Brian Hicks, Bruce Kimmerly, Jerry Clifford, I'll announce it since we need that, and non-voting member Dick Freege. At the beginning of the meeting, Robert Marion and Frank Sullivan are absent. The first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from September 26, 2007 meeting. The commissioners have had an opportunity to review the minutes. Are there any questions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Kimberly, and a second. Thank you, Brian. All those in favor by show of hands. It's unanimous. Next on the agenda is the approval of claims and purchase orders for payment. And we, again, have had an opportunity to review those. Cam, would you like to make comments concerning these?
I don't really have any comments unless there are any questions.
Okay.
I have one question.
Mr. Kimmler.
How much money is left in the Brownfields grant?
I'd have to check on that. Our consultant tracks it for every draw, and then it's processed directly by the controller's office. And off the top of my head, I don't know that I could tell you the balance. We do have money left, and important to also recognize that the total grant was $400,000, $200,000 of which could be used to assess hazardous waste sites or hazardous material sites, $200,000 of which can be used for petroleum sites. And I think we've spent down both, but especially the hazardous side. Fortunately, I think we have a couple of upcoming assessments on petroleum sites that will take up some of that money. But I'd say if I had to ballpark it, we're about 60%, 60% through. We've got another year on the cooperative agreement.
If we could just get an update at next meeting, how much is, because I know there are a lot of things going on, and that Brownfield grant showing up on the claims vouchers pretty regularly.
Yeah, we're doing a fair amount of work under it, which is, I think, good because the EPA likes to see them spent down quickly, and so I think that's been that's picked up and should continue. But I'll check on the balances of the two halves of the grant for next month.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Welcome,
Hi, I'm late.
Sullivan.
I had a quick question on the, I saw a $9,400 charge for an appraisal on the Shadeland property.
It's appraisals for both Shadeland properties, two appraisals of each, and there are really, it all looks like one, but 4423 and 4399 are two separate properties, so they're appraised separately, and Indiana law requires two independent appraisals of each prior to disposition. So that's what that is.
For commercial appraisal.
It's 4 commercial appraisals.
Thank you. I was like, man, that seems a little bit high.
Yeah, no, it's actually 4.
Okay.
And then we'll have, I think, $500 or $600 to do 2 independent appraisals of the small lot on 52nd Street, which we just received the appraisal. I anticipate the invoice will be coming shortly.
Commissioner Sullivan, just before you arrived, a question was asked by Bruce concerning the amount of Brownfield's grant money that's still available after the payment of this claim. And Mr. Carnes will provide that information at the next meeting. Thank you. No other questions from the commissioners regarding the claims? No? May I have a motion for approval?
Also move.
Brian Hicks, so moved. And second, please? And Commissioner Sullivan. All those in favor by show of hands? Unanimous. Thank you. Mr. Starnes, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I was going to add this, and I'll go right to it since it just came up, but the North Shadeland property that we've discussed, 4423 and 4399 North Shadeland, of course, the plan there is to do the items required under state law, the two appraisals, et cetera, and move towards setting that up for a request for proposals for redevelopment of that parcel through the Redevelopment Commission. In the meantime, one of the other pieces of due diligence on our part has been some environmental assessment. So we had a phase one performed under the grant that was covered by the grant, which found some recognized environmental conditions that needed further investigation. So we've had our contractor put together a scope of work for a phase two investigation, which has been approved. So we'll go ahead and do some sampling of soil and groundwater on the site. There are likely 2 underground storage tanks on the site that we will investigate to see if there are any impacts around them. This sort of extends the timeline for putting out an RFP, but front-ending this work not only enables us to do it under the grant and not out of our pocket, so to speak, but also clarify the environmental condition of the property before we were to put it out for disposition, and thereby sort of eliminate those unknowns on the front end. So I think it'll save some time in the end. What I would like to avoid is getting interest or bids back that are discounted due to potential environmental contamination or some uncertainty in that regard, or have a lack of interest due to perceived environmental threats. So we'd like to clear that up now when we can. So that work will be performed in the next 30 to 60 days, and then we'll look at putting together an RFP. So that's the update on the Shadeland property. We're doing some environmental assessment, essentially.
And what the phase two came in at as far as an estimate?
The work itself, I think the phase two totals about 18,000, but that unless we can go ahead and pull the tanks out of the ground, which may add another 10 to 15, but we have, especially on the petroleum side of the grant, we have plenty of proceeds left, and if we can get those tanks out now, then we might as well do it and get them out of the way so they're not a problem in the future. And that work is often approved under even assessment grants, so that samples can be taken in the tank pit, make sure there aren't any impacts from leaching over time. So at the end of the day, given this is a redevelopment target, I think we'll see some good leverage down the road in terms of private investment that will sort of make good use of those EPA funds on the front end here.
So on your timeline now, it would be RFP issuance in January now, Graham?
Yeah, early next year, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
With do we have to provide 30 days for a response, or can we do it in 15?
I think there's some flexibility there. We'd normally do 30, and I think it would behoove us to keep it out for 30 or 45 to make sure that we get all the interest we can. The more proposals we have to choose from, the better, honestly. So,
Okay. On a RFP like this, I'm not sure that the amount of time that's out there is going to make that much difference, but it'll be kind of interesting to see that.
okay.
Okay. So what you're saying, that'll be concluded then, possibly by the end of February?
The environmental due diligence and assessment and RFP and receiving proposals by end of February is reasonable.
Well, you know how patient I am with these things. Yeah. So, okay, very good. Would you like to start the staff report agenda now?
Yes, sure.
Thank you.
We talked about a couple of projects at the last meeting, and I wanted to report on progress there. Not yet at as you'll note, not yet at a point where we're requesting approvals from this body, but I think we may be there by the November meeting. So I wanted to make sure that I'm updating you accordingly about progress on East 59th Street. and in the Trades District both. On East 59th Street, of course, that's we've got a plastics company interested in building a new plant there, making good reuse of that site. It would be about a $10.5 million investment here in Lawrence in our TIF. We've continued to work with the user, and it's right.
I just asked, is your mic on?
Oh, yeah. Is
Okay.
problems hearing me? No. Okay.
Oh, there's better.
So we've continued to evaluate that and work with the consultant that's representing the user there on what would make that deal possible. And they've requested that the Redevelopment Commission consider assisting with financing of that property through issuance of what would be a developer-backed and developer-purchased bond. So we're evaluating their proposal in that regard internally and with soon with a financial advisor to look at coverages and how that would work. It's on its face something that would pencil out given what they've projected for us in terms of value and projected assessed value and tax rate, but we want to make sure that we have feel good about that moving forward. So I would anticipate that's something that we'll come back to. It would be a piece of funding the development of that site. That again, I think we agreed was a positive direction for that site to go. So we're evaluating that internally, but it does seem to be moving fairly quickly. The timeline on the manufacturer's part is fairly aggressive. They'd like to be in the ground moving forward on constructing their new facility by spring of next year. So that's ratcheting up sort of timeline in terms of how this is progressing. So we may be at a point by next month that we've fully vetted the deal internally and are coming to you to discuss the details and make sure that everybody's on the same page. If we were to proceed as they've outlined to us, it would be issuance of a bond that would take approval from, I believe, this body as well as the Economic Development Commission and the council. So it would be a multi-phase kind of approval process. And if we're looking like we're going to get there, I think we'll probably be doing some meetings in between now and the next meeting on an individual basis, just so we make sure all the details are clear to you all prior to the next meeting. So that's where that one stands. I think we feel like it's on good footing and moving ahead, and the interest in the site is genuine. I think this is their first choice site, but we do have some competition with Greenfield and with Columbus, Ohio. So we're keeping that in mind as well and trying to keep up with the pace of the deal here. So any questions on that one?
Only one. Is there an example? I've never heard, as you know, I've never seen a developer-backed and developer-participating municipal bond. This is new, kind of creative. Is there an example of that somewhere? Yeah.
I don't know of one in Lawrence that we've done here, but the concept of and the developer purchased bond would not be unlike Monarch purchased the bonds that were issued on that TIF. So that I think has been done for some time. The concept of a developer-backed bond is kind of becoming a little more in vogue. The thing there is the developer or the user would be putting itself in the position of covering any shortfall in projected revenue from the new development. So if it were to not be assessed as high as we thought it might be, based on the construction cost, or not taxed at the rate that we thought it might be, as opposed to having a shortfall that would be on the part of the municipality in terms of paying debt service on the bond, that would be covered by the actual user. So it's a little more secure, a little less risk on the part of the city or the issuing body. So
the developer backs the entire bond? We're not participating in backing the bond? We'd have to maintain no reserve? So it's not really our bond then, is it?
It's issued by
It is
by
issued
the city
as a municipal bond, serviced, if you will, by the developer.
it's serviced by
And backed by the developer. So the developer would be required to maintain reserves?
they may. I think that's
Okay.
that'll be sorted out as we work out sort of the deal. They've just put out there, even on the front end, that they're willing to enter an agreement where they would back any shortfall. We may end up even servicing the debt from the increment created, but if there were a shortfall in terms of, we thought we were going to get this revenue and would be able to therefore cover our debt service comfortably, but we've had a low assessment or the rate isn't set where we thought it would be, so there's a shortfall, there would be a contractual provision where we would be able to make up that difference with the developer's money, not our own.
Interesting.
That's the broad strokes of it. So plenty of details that would be worked out, but I wanted to communicate that the proposal was for that kind of arrangement.
Interesting.
So I think
Questions? How many square feet are we talking about as far as a building? And how many dollars roughly are we talking about on the bond?
I think the total square footage of the facility is proposed to be between 100 and 110,000 square feet. Construction costs of about $6.5 million, another $5 or so in business personal property, and they're requesting that we issue a bond around $1.4 million that would that includes, of course, cost of issuance and Cap I, that would amount to about $1 million, $1.1 million into the construction fund as a portion of that 6.5. Specifically, especially to address some sort of site premium kind of issues there with regard to the need for additional shoring and larger than normal footers, because some of the fill that was brought to the site to backfill areas that were excavated as part of the environmental remediation are sandy or otherwise not structural fill. So there's some added site costs there, and I think this contribution would help that whole development pencil out. So on the whole, given the return there, our initial thought was this looks like something we can work with. So let's bring in, let's take some more time and think about the details and think about an FAA and input, et cetera. So that's where we are.
When do you see this coming together, Cam?
I think it may, depending on how we want to coordinate the various approvals that are needed. I think in some instances, municipalities will sometimes do a joint meeting of RDC and the EDC and the council and whatever approving body is needed just to be efficient. I think we may be ready from a deal, sort of hammered out details standpoint by the end of November. But it may be a little bit longer than that. We'll see how it
Great.
comes
Thank
together.
you very much.
It's moving
Good work.
quickly though, because they're aggressive and want to be in the ground in the spring, and so we're keeping up.
Other questions from the commissioner? Thank you.
Sure. Similarly, we talked about some interest from a large mechanical and refrigeration contractor in the trades district. They've been working with Browning Investments, the industrial real estate developer, on putting together what a new headquarters might look like in Lawrence. So have some initial site planning feedback, et cetera. Continue to really like the site that the RDC owns there at 7600 Pendleton Pike, and have recognized that there are some site premiums there as well. We were aware of that. The grade is an issue, and to maximize the square footage of a building on that site, the ideal scenario would be to put stormwater retention underground as opposed to in a pond at surface level, which is some added cost. So they've asked if we would consider contributing funds necessary to accomplish those items to the deal to make it happen, which we're evaluating as well. I think Their estimates projected those site premiums at about $350,000. The total development cost of that new building would be about $5.5 million. And again, it'd be headquarters for a company of 250 plus that does a range of work in 40 states, and a good visible sort of proponent of the trades district. They've seen that plan. They want to be involved in getting that off the ground and being an early adopter. So I think all of those things are positive. And in terms of where we are, I think that one's, the interest is genuine. We continue to work on what the numbers might look like, and I anticipate that in the next week or two we'll have a pro forma from the developer to evaluate and see what gaps are there, and do some thinking about how we might participate as a body to make that deal happen. And that's another thing that I think would probably will continue to move quickly. We may have some new business on the agenda next month, but if so, I think we'll be meeting sort of one-on-one or one-on-two in the interim here to talk about the details, so that everybody has some time to digest where things are going and ask some questions and have some further conversations. But wanted to report that was that deal also continues to move forward at a pretty good clip, and seems to have some good legs under it. So good news.
Would that headquarter building be adjacent to the possible hotel that we're talking about?
I think it would be the way it's sort of being approached would take the entire site. So it would forego the hotel for now. That may be a component of the trades district down the road, or the area, but it may need to take a different site. I think this is an example of best laid plans meeting something we might not have been able to predict. The hotel was, I think, given that the site is visible, I think that was a common feedback from counselors and area business people and et cetera. But we've seen from the CBRE report that the economics are a little tough. It would require, I took that report and ran it past a couple of colleagues that work for development firms that do hotels, and did some pro forma analysis around it. I think for a kind of a middling range hotel, we're probably looking at a likely investment from the TIF of about $3 million to get a hotel propped up on that site. And a hotel's usually a $12 to $14 million investment, so not insignificant, but at the same time, that's a lot of cash to access by virtue of issuing bonds or taking on debt to prop up a hotel, whereas this may be more in keeping with the trades district to land this headquarters that could take up that site in a positive way and lead to some further investment in that regard, while requiring less from the Redevelopment Commission in terms of outlay of cash to get something going. So that's certainly a consideration, I would think. Or do we want to forego a hotel? So be thinking about that. But in the meantime, we'll continue to work internally on, let's hammer out the details of what this would look like. If that makes sense.
Well, I guess the only other comment, Brian, that I would make is that when the consultant was here regarding the potentials for the hotels, one of the things that he very clearly stated in our little meeting with him was that this is one instance where what we're doing with the trades district and developing the area could create a requirement for the hotel, would create an environment that would make it successful. It's a stretch, as he put it right now. So I think
it's a very good point. Nope, he said exactly that. He said now, probably uphill battle. You could maybe get one. He's not very sure that we could, or that it would take a lot of investment on our part. He said you do some of this that's called for in the plan, because that was, he looked at that when he was doing his report. You get some of this going, I could see this, turning the area around and increasing the demand for a hotel and making it much more economically feasible for a developer. So,
I knew you had come back and said we weren't gonna get a
right,
marquee name there. We were probably looking at a second tier
yeah.
hotel, motel, whatever, so. The image of the gateway into Lawrence being a marquee hotel kind of didn't pan out, maybe that.
Right, or not yet, anyway, yeah.
It's kind of the way he put it, not yet.
He did.
Yeah.
I think there is taking that report and then again talking to some developers that I know that do hotels. I think they're one of them, Holiday, in fact, that worked on the plan, has done several hotels lately and works with a specific operator management company that has some interest in placing a new. La Quinta has a new model that they'd like to get out there. It doesn't look half bad, but $3 million of public investment for a La Quinta that 10, 15 years from now may be more of a drag than not, because a lot of hotels just don't age very well. Versus a strong employer with a good physical presence in Lawrence that's very consistent with the trades district may be a better way to sort of catalyze the area. So we'll keep that in mind certainly as we move forward and consider what are we letting go of. But the more detail we can get around this deal in the meantime, I think helps us make that evaluation.
Sometimes I think we lose sight of how fortunate we were to get that Menards there. That property could have sat
Right.
vacant as a demolished old motel or hotel there and just sat. And at least now when you pull off the interstate, you've got a good looking department or hardware store, whatever you want to call it, that
Right.
home improvement store that looks active and vibrant and
It certainly seems to be busy. That kind of commercial traffic is never bad, and certainly better than
yeah,
what it would otherwise, have been a
what it was.
hulking, abandoned, or nearly hotel, which is never good. And they had, despite the fact that that's in Indianapolis, of course, they had the Lawrence mayor come and cut the board to open the store. So I think they sort of aligned themselves with Lawrence across the street and like being nearby, and that's good too.
As did Myers.
Yeah, I did too. So that's again another one that's moving forward very quickly. I would anticipate more information to you all about that in the near future. Touching on some infrastructure projects, Franklin Road is progressing on schedule. We've now wholesale changed to right-of-way analysis and engineering, starting to make some contacts with landowners in the area to show them kind of what the plan calls for and prepare them for then negotiation about right-of-way acquisition that will start in earnest later this year or early next. So we're maybe even a month or so ahead of schedule on that project, which is good. Record Street, we've talked about in some detail about with regard to the trades district plan being implemented as a key piece of infrastructure there, completing the street that's interrupted now there near Bragdon, and also enhancing it and adding sidewalks and trees and making it a more positive sort of east-west flow through the trades district. I've been working with our DPW director and an engineering firm about how do we get that to the sort of the federal aid stage for a federal aid road project on Record Street. So we've had some conversations with the Metropolitan Planning Organization about the potential there. And I just learned today that the MPO believes that the Record Street project itself is not probably eligible for federal aid Department of Transportation dollars to assist with construction, which is a setback somewhat. Certainly, we had hoped that we may be able to get an 80-20 federal grant for construction. It's going to be a fairly expensive road to build with the right-of-way that would need to be acquired, et cetera. So we're going to have to look at some other avenues of funding that, whether through the Economic Development Administration at the federal level, which does have some infrastructure funds or otherwise, and the mayor and the controller and David, our corporation counselor, are headed to Washington, D.C. to meet with all the Indiana lawmakers and staffers tomorrow and Thursday. So this will be one of the topics they address with them. We've got some projects we'd like to do. What's federal funding picture look like? How can we, do you know of any products out there that we could build a road that's not DOT funds tend to look toward regionally significant projects that add traffic capacity. This is more about serving an area that's in need of redevelopment. So is there a product that we could use for that? So hopefully those will be fruitful, and we may have some ideas about other ways we can pursue funding for that key project moving forward. But regardless, we'll continue to look at ways to fund it. Given that it will be important. Let's see, what else? Oh, I don't know if I ran into you there, Jerry, but the ribbon cutting for the Art to Remember headquarters on 59th and Lee Road was this past week, which was a nice ceremony. So they're up and running over there. And apart from that, it's our understanding that Fort Harrison Reuse Authority is looking at making some adjustments to staffing. So I have a meeting with the board president and treasurer this week to talk about what that will look like. We'll see. I think they realize the property holdings that the Reuse Authority has right now are sort of dwindling down to 3 or 4, and so they see a sort of this is a moment in time where they could reduce some of their staff overhead costs, et cetera, and focus on getting those off toward development. I will say I also I attended the AIM conference, used to be the Indiana Association of Cities and Towns, in Evansville, along with a contingent from the city last week, a couple weeks ago. And I met the owner of Context Design, which is positioning itself to acquire the old PX on Lawton Loop. It's a landscape architecture and planning firm. He was very excited about the area, and actually went to a workshop that he was one of the presenters for, and was very engaging. And I think that would be I think that's a good company to have located here. I think they appreciate the history and the significance of the buildings and the architecture, and it'll be a good addition to the creative office tenants in and around the fort. So look forward to that happening hopefully yet this year. Let's see. Any questions on that stuff?
Good.
And I wanted to mention, because it came up last time, I did draft and send a letter to the realtor at Keller Williams Commercial that's listing the Marsh Shopping Center on Franklin Road. I will forward a copy to all of you as I promised to do. And that's gone in the mail to her as well. So I'll make sure that gets out to you, see the letter, and have the address. Certainly, if you or people that you know want to make similar contacts to the realtor, I think that's certainly appropriate. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Cam. Other questions? Excuse me.
Although while we're at it, maybe I would point out that I think we have a guest that's joined us, Trace Yates, who's now the executive director of the Lawrence Chamber of Commerce, has taken over from Jessica following her departure for the IEDC. And if you've not met Trace, I recommend that you do so. Grab him before he leaves this evening. He's good, engaging, energetic individual, good business background. I think we're excited from the city standpoint to have him in that role as a director of the Lawrence Chamber of Commerce, and we'll support him as he looks to grow the organization into an even more positive and community building asset here in Lawrence. So,
Welcome, Trace.
thanks for being here.
I guess I had a couple follow-up items. That little strip of ground out by Pendleton, by Monarch across.
Yes.
How are we doing on that? Anything new?
Yeah, I just got the appraisal, the appraisals that were required to get last week. So we'll do the public notice and get that out. and that's where we are. We needed to have that as information. I don't think the law requires that we set our price based on that, but we had to have an appraisal to back ourselves up. And so that finally came in, and we'll get the public notice out and notify landowners and go from there.
And then we've also talked about that prompt med at the corner, 59th and
Over near Sunnyside and Pendleton Pike, yes.
anything new there?
No, I think all that I know is the operator that had been in there before was purchased. The corporation, and I forget what it was called, Doctors Express, I believe, was purchased by a larger national sort of urgent care operator, and would be rebranding and reopening. That was our understanding.
But nothing's happened.
Nah, it's sitting vacant.
No,
Yeah.
no, exactly.
I've not heard anything further.
Thanks, Cam. Good questions. Other comments? The next meeting of the reuse of, I was going to say reuse authority, the RDC. The November meeting will occur on November 21st at 4 p.m., just as a reminder. Cam, at that meeting, at the November meeting, I'd ask that staff determine the necessity for meeting in December.
Okay.
We had talked before about whether or not we'd need to meet during that month, and could advise the commission
Sure.
at the November meeting. If we do, we'll see if we can work something out. If not, because our meeting would be between Christmas and New Year's.
Yep. Yeah, good point. We'll look at that.
Okay, thank you very much. And if no other business, if there's no other business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. And Commissioner Sullivan, motion, and Bruce, second. All those in favor by show of hands. We are adjourned. Thank you.